The air over occupied France, April 8, 1943, was clean, cold, and quiet, a perfect stage for a moment of supreme German confidence. At 27,000 feet, where the oxygen was thin and the light crystalline, stood Oberleutnant Ralph Hermeken, a seasoned veteran of Jagdgeschwader 26. He watched, not with fear, but with an open smirk visible beneath the rim of his oxygen mask, as the new American fighters lumbered into the stratosphere. What he saw was a spectacle of American industrial arrogance, a collection of fat, barrel-shaped machines straining against gravity. "They have sent us flying milk bottles," Hermeken reportedly radioed his wingman, unable to suppress his laughter. The contempt was instant and universal. To German pilots, accustomed to the elegant, agile lines of the Focke-Wulf 190 and the Messerschmitt 109, these Republic P-47 Thunderbolts were grotesque. They were the ultimate insult to the German philosophy of lightweight, sleek interception, a 7-ton brick attempting to fly. The conflict, then, was instantly defined, a test of dogma. On one side, the proven German conviction that only agility and minimal weight could prevail. On the other, the American answer, an ugly, heavy behemoth that struggled for every foot of altitude. The P-47, the Jug, was immediately ridiculed. It was a joke. But what if that laughter was not just contempt, but the sound of history making a fundamental error? What Hermeken and his comrades failed to see through the glare of the sun was that they were not witnessing a foolish experiment. They were watching the painful, struggling, yet inevitable arrival of the weapon that would systematically destroy the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. The joke would last less than a year, and the laughter would die with their comrades. That laughter at 27,000 feet was a fatal oversight, a historical miscalculation born of focusing on the wrong metrics. The German pilots saw the P-47's poor turn rate. They missed its capacity for punishment. They mocked its weight. They ignored the 2,000 horsepower that made it a missile in a dive. Here is the hidden truth that turned the tide of the air war. The Thunderbolt was not designed to be an elegant fighter, but a durable, high-altitude platform optimized for one brutal task. It was built around a singular, unstoppable thesis. This transformation, from milk bottle to terror, was rooted in three non-negotiable elements: mass for incredible diving speed, power from the high-performance turbo-supercharged engine, and most crucially, the 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns. This wasn't a skirmisher. It was a devastating aerial shotgun. We're going to dissect the logic of that destruction. We will reveal the strategic decisions, the engineering marvels, and the desperate combat moments that turned a punchline into a nightmare, and ultimately forced the Luftwaffe to concede the sky to American industrial might and the sheer, unholy volume of lead that the P-47 rained upon them. This is the story of how the German pilots stopped laughing. The Thunderbolt was never meant to be pretty. Its origin lay in the panicked realization of 1940. America needed a fighter that could match the Luftwaffe's speed and range over Europe, and its designer, Alexander Kartveli, made a radical choice. Instead of striving for European elegance, he embraced American industrial might. The result was a machine built around the biggest, most powerful engine available, the 2,000 horsepower Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double Wasp. To house the massive engine, the oil coolers, and the complex turbo supercharger system required a giant airframe. This logic flew directly in the face of the German ideal, which valued minimal weight and maximum agility. The P-47's 7-ton combat weight meant it was heavier than many light bombers of the era. When the drawings were finalized, even American observers were skeptical. "It will be a dinosaur," one engineer predicted. When the first prototype rolled out, the question on many pilots' lips was, does this thing actually fly? Kartveli famously defended the design by stating, "If it has good proportions, it will fly well." He gave his creation the proportions of a boxer, not a ballerina, a resilient, heavily armed brawler. This was the ultimate technical underdog, born not of finesse, but of overwhelming power and deliberate mass. The P-47's enormous size was dictated by a single, non-negotiable component. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine. This 18-cylinder radial powerhouse generated over 2,000 horsepower, a truly staggering output for the era. Turning the Thunderbolt's massive paddle-bladed propeller. This was the raw, unadulterated muscle that gave the American fighter its signature speed and acceleration, a fundamental break from the German design philosophy of minimizing engine weight. But the true genius was not the engine itself, but its supporting infrastructure, the turbo supercharger system. To handle the tremendous volume of exhaust gases and maintain power at high altitude, Pratt had to place the supercharger at the very back of the fuselage, near the tail wheel. This required massive ductwork, miles of plumbing, running through the length of the plane. This complex system was the reason for the P-47's barrel-like shape, yet it provided its ultimate tactical advantage. While the German Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs relied on conventional liquid-cooled engines that began to gas for air above 25,000 feet, the Thunderbolt maintained sea-level performance in the stratosphere. It could dive from 35,000 feet, and, critically, it could operate and fight with full power at altitudes where the German fighters were sluggish and unresponsive. This technical deep dive reveals the secret of the P-47's success. It wasn't a better fighter. It was simply operating in an entirely different, superior pressure zone. The P-47's immense power was a double-edged sword, proving as dangerous to its pilots as it was intended to be for the enemy. Before a single Thunderbolt could face a German pilot, a grueling and terrifying process had to unfold. The sheer torque of the 2,000 horsepower engine was notorious, often attempting to wrench the aircraft into a violent, irrecoverable ground loop on takeoff, shattering the frames and nerves of inexperienced pilots. This was a machine that demanded respect, and it took its toll quickly. During the initial training phase, the newly formed 56 Fighter Group, one of the first to fly the Jug, suffered a staggering loss of 18 pilots and 41 aircraft to accidents before ever seeing combat. This butcher's bill was a brutal baptism, cementing the aircraft's reputation as a temperamental, terrifying beast. But the ultimate danger lay in the dive. The P-47 could achieve speeds no previous propeller aircraft could safely manage, leading to the deadly phenomenon of compressibility. As pilots pushed the nose down past 500 miles per hour, the air around the wings essentially thickened, robbing the ailerons of control and locking the plane into a terminal plunge. This inherent, near-fatal flaw in its design sets the stage for the enormous challenge American pilots had to overcome. Only by mastering this unpredictable, powerful machine could they hope to survive the Luftwaffe. The initial combat deployment fulfilled every single one of the German pilots' dismissive predictions. When the Thunderbolts finally met the elite Jagdflieger in the skies above France in the spring of 1943, the results were, frankly, disastrous. The P-47's poor low-altitude performance and sluggish response in traditional turning engagements left it hopelessly vulnerable. One German ace, Joseph Pips Priller, whose combat reports formed the basis of the Luftwaffe's early intelligence, was famously scathing. He reportedly dismissed the Thunderbolt as a machine that flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. The scoreboard reflected this contempt. In the first 3 months of operation, the tally was grim. 14 Thunderbolts lost for just 3 German kills. This period was the absolute low point, the true ordeal of the P-47's combat debut. The British Royal Air Force, accustomed to the nimble Spitfire, quietly voiced their skepticism, viewing the American brute as an expensive, ineffective vanity project. American pilots, facing these losses, began to feel they were indeed meat for the slaughter, flying a technical marvel that was fundamentally flawed in the heat of battle. The Germans had every right to laugh. The machine was, in these initial duels, proving their entire aerial philosophy correct. The P-47 was a failure, and its pilots were paying the price. Amidst the early string of defeats, a perplexing pattern began to emerge in the Allied hangars. The first hint that the Germans had fundamentally misunderstood their opponent. While Thunderbolts were frequently shot down, many others were limping home, riddled with damage that would have disintegrated any other contemporary fighter. One famous example was a P-47 that landed with a staggering record: 21 German cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes. Its pilot walked away unscathed. The question of how did they survive was the first crack in the German certainty. The answer, ironically, was in the ugly mass they had mocked. Unlike the liquid-cooled Messerschmitts and Spitfires, the P-47's robust, air-cooled radial engine, the massive R-2800, was virtually its own shield. It could absorb multiple direct hits and still run, lacking the vulnerable radiator and coolant lines whose puncture spelled instant death for German fighters. The structure itself was over-engineered, heavy, and built with simple, solid strength. The P-47 didn't fight well, but its overwhelming durability meant that the German aces could empty their entire magazines into the flying milk bottle and watch, horrified, as it simply refused to die. This revelation, that the P-47 was a flying tank, was the first terrifying truth of its unprecedented survivability. The moment that shattered German assumptions and revealed the P-47's true, terrifying nature occurred on June 26, 1943. The protagonist was Robert S. Johnson, a young pilot with the 56 Fighter Group who would become one of the top American aces. During a routine escort mission, Johnson was separated and pounced upon by a highly experienced Focke-Wulf 190 pilot. In the ensuing dogfight, the German fighter locked onto the Thunderbolt's tail, unleashing devastating bursts of 20mm cannon fire. The sound was like a hammer against steel. Johnson's canopy immediately imploded, fragments of perspex ripping into his face and arms, and the cockpit flooded with freezing air. Control cables were shredded, instruments exploded, and the plane bucked violently, convinced it should be falling. The German pilot, seeing the massive damage, moved in for the kill. He patiently flew alongside the crippled Thunderbolt, methodically emptying all of his remaining cannon and machine gun ammunition into the 7-ton fuselage. This wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Yet, through some miracle of engineering and chance, the P-47 kept flying. The air-cooled engine was hit multiple times, but the cylinders kept turning. The pilot watched, stunned, as his own ammunition ran dry in Johnson's bullet-riddled plane. A wreck with 200 holes and severed control surfaces limped away into the clouds. This single, impossible ride, a death sentence that refused to be carried out, was the emotional peak of the P-47's transformation. It defied every German assumption about combat damage tolerance. They had aimed to kill the pilot by destroying the machine, but the P-47 proved it was fundamentally immune to death by conventional means. This incident sent shockwaves through both Allied and Axis intelligence. The Thunderbolt wasn't a fighter. It was an invincible tank with wings. When Robert Johnson finally brought his ravaged P-47 back to base, the airmen didn't see an airplane. They saw a miracle. The official inspection revealed a shocking tableau of destruction. Over 200 bullet holes, the main wing spar nearly severed, the rudder cable shot completely through, and large sections of the rear fuselage, the longerons, splintered by high-explosive cannon fire. Crucially, the air-cooled engine was wounded, but still running. The psychological fallout was immediate and profound on both sides of the conflict. For the Americans, it was a moment of absolute validation. They had not built an elegant fighter, but they had accidentally built the toughest aircraft in the sky. Their design choice of mass and radial power, initially a weakness, was now their salvation. They had been underestimating their own creation. For the Germans, the reality was met with utter denial. Intelligence reports on the incident were initially dismissed, deemed too demoralizing or simply too unbelievable. How could one of their best pilots empty his entire payload into a stationary target and fail to bring it down? This moment signaled a terrifying truth. The rules of aerial combat, where a few well-placed shots meant victory, no longer applied. To kill a Thunderbolt, you didn't just have to hit it, you had to annihilate it. The revelation of the P-47's invulnerability was a partial victory, but the fundamental tactical problem remained. It was too heavy to turn with a Messerschmitt. The man who solved this problem was Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, who fostered a critical aha moment among his pilots. Zemke realized the solution wasn't to fight the P-47's flaws, but to exploit its immense strengths, power, high-altitude performance, and, crucially, mass. The resulting strategy was the boom and zoom tactic, and it completely rewrote the rules of aerial engagement. Instead of engaging in a low-speed turning fight, the P-47 would use its superior altitude, thanks to the turbo supercharger, to gain a position high above the German fighters. Then, it would utilize its 7-ton weight and powerful engine to unleash a devastating dive, often exceeding 550 miles per hour. This dive was the boom, a single, high-speed attack that utilized the Thunderbolt's raw velocity. Crucially, the P-47 would never slow down or turn a chase. Once the attack was complete, the pilot would convert that incredible speed back into altitude with a steep zoom climb, putting them back in a dominant position high above the battle. This tactical mastery bypassed the P-47's poor turn rate entirely, leaving the German fighters helplessly behind and demonstrating a brilliant American adaptation to the realities of their technical underdog. The Thunderbolt didn't need agility. It needed only to fall and climb faster than anything else in the sky. The P-47's final and most persuasive argument was its armament, a concentrated blast of firepower unmatched by any single-engine fighter of World War II. While German fighters typically carried 2 cannons and 2 machine guns, the Thunderbolt packed an intimidating battery of 8.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, mounted in the wings. This design decision was pure, industrial-scale brutality. The combined rate of fire from this battery was staggering, over 6,000 rounds per minute. This wasn't merely shooting. It was the ability to project an avalanche of heavy-caliber metal at a target. The sheer weight of the projectiles, coupled with their armor-piercing and incendiary cores, was designed to rip through the light alloys of an enemy aircraft and ignite whatever was left. The P-47 pilot didn't need surgical precision. By setting the convergence distance, the point at which the 8 lines of fire intersected, to a tight 6-foot diameter, they could guarantee devastation within the kill zone. A German pilot flying through this visceral impact of hot steel didn't just suffer damage. His plane didn't just fall, it disintegrated. The fuselage would shear apart, the wing spars would buckle, and the engine would explode in a cloud of flame and shrapnel. For the German pilots, facing the boom and zoom attack meant a horrifying, fleeting encounter with a phenomenon they had never before experienced. They were no longer fighting a duel. They were facing an inescapable, concentrated wall of lead. This relentless, overwhelming volume of fire was the final, devastating answer to their early laughter, ensuring that the target aircraft ceased to exist in a single, catastrophic burst. The German tactical certainty that they could simply stay high and outclimb the clumsy American fighters was brutally shattered on October 8, 1943. The victim was one of the Luftwaffe's very best. Major Hans Philipp, commander of Jägerschwader I and a decorated ace with over 200 victories. Philipp was the embodiment of German aerial excellence. Yet he was about to become a victim of pure technological inevitability. Philipp engaged a formation of P-47s above 28,000 feet in his formidable Focke-Wulf 190. At that height, his conventionally supercharged, liquid-cooled engine was struggling. His plane was sluggish, the controls heavy and unresponsive. Meanwhile, the P-47s, utilizing the full benefit of their turbo-supercharged system, were diving from an even higher altitude of 32,000 feet. They attacked with a speed and power that Philipp's plane simply couldn't match. The subsequent engagement was brief and fatal. Philipp's Jagdflieger skill was rendered irrelevant by a P-47's lightning-fast pass. He was shot down and killed. This loss sent a cold shockwave through the Luftwaffe's high command. The death of such an elite ace at extreme altitude proved that the P-47 was not just a tough low-altitude brawler. It was a high-altitude predator that commanded the critical upper air. The American machine, once mocked for its size, had established a technological supremacy that the best German pilots could no longer overcome. The P-47 was still evolving. Even after the adoption of the boom and zoom tactic, American engineers continued to refine the beast. The critical upgrade came with the P-47D-22 variant, which featured the massive Hamilton Standard hydromatic paddle blade propeller. These wider, more efficient blades immediately translated the engine's immense horsepower into dramatically improved performance, overcoming the final struggles in the climb. This single modification was a revelation, boosting the Thunderbolt's climb rate from a respectable 2,200 feet per minute to over 3,000 feet per minute. The aircraft was finally maximizing its power, cementing its high-altitude superiority beyond question. But this engineering improvement had an unforeseen sensory impact. The change in the propeller's geometry, coupled with the supercharged engine, gave the Thunderbolt an entirely new and distinctive acoustic signature. The sound evolved from a laboring drone to a deep, resonant, thundering roar, the Donnerschlag, or thunderclap. For German ground troops, the sound of that distinctive, menacing rumble was enough. It was a physical, terrifying signal that the sky was about to open up and deliver a devastating payload. The laughter was replaced not just by fear, but by a chilling, identifiable sound. By late 1943, the P-47's mission expanded, pivoting from pure high-altitude fighter escort to the devastating role of ground attack aircraft, or JABO, Jag Bomber. The aircraft's inherent ruggedness and immense load-carrying capacity, more than that of many dedicated bombers, made this transformation seamless. The Thunderbolt was refitted to carry two 1,000-pound bombs and up to 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, VARs, augmenting its 8.50 caliber machine guns. In this new dimension, the P-47 became the ultimate nightmare of the German Wehrmacht. It was no longer a fight between fighter pilots. It was a campaign of industrial-scale annihilation against trains, tanks, supply depots, and troop columns. The descriptions of these attacks from the ground were harrowing. The famed German tanker, Colonel Hans von Luck, wrote of the attacks with dread. The sound was terrifying. Engines roaring, rockets screaming. The P-47 pilot, diving from altitude, could destroy an entire segment of the battlefield in a single pass. Statistical analysis showed that one Thunderbolt could, and often did, knock out over 20 military vehicles in a single strafing run. The resulting terror in a new dimension was devastating. It wasn't just physical destruction. The mere sound of the P-47's powerful engine instilled JABO fever, a crippling psychological paralysis that halted supply movements and signaled the inescapable fate of German forces attempting to move in daylight. The flying milk bottle had become the grim reaper of the European battlefield. The ultimate factor in the P-47's success was one that no amount of German piloting skill or technical innovation could counter: the relentless, overwhelming might of American industrial capacity. This reality found its starkest and most dramatic expression during Operation Bodenplatte, the massive German surprise air attack on Allied airfields on New Year's Day, 1945. The attack was initially a success for the Luftwaffe. At one airfield alone, the Germans managed to destroy 22 P-47s sitting on the tarmac. A captured German pilot, elated by the perceived success, was brought before Major George Brooking of the 366 Fighter Group. The German pilot boasted about the crippling blow dealt to the American air arm, convinced he had participated in a decisive victory. Brooking's response was a moment of absolute, chilling clarity that perfectly encapsulates the video's thesis. He looked the pilot dead in the eye and delivered the legendary retort: "That's a shame. But don't worry, son. By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" This quote is the defining climax of the war's industrial narrative. The Americans could replace metal in days. The Germans, fighting with diminishing resources, could not replace their highly trained pilots. The P-47's simplicity, durability, and high rate of production meant it represented an unstoppable avalanche of men and machines that buried the Luftwaffe not just in lead, but in sheer, unassailable quantity. The war in the air was lost the moment American factories decided the P-47 was a weapon worth producing on an impossible scale. The most crushing reality for the Luftwaffe was not the P-47's superior diving speed or its exceptional durability. It was the sheer scale of American production. This was the industrial logic of the war, and it delivered a psychological shock of awe and overwhelming superiority that proved the German defeat was inevitable. In total, the Republic Aviation Company and its licensees produced an astounding 15,683 P-47 Thunderbolts, making it the most produced American fighter aircraft of the war. This was not the creation of a few gifted artisans. It was the output of an industrial machine running at maximum capacity. At the Farmingdale plant, the assembly line reached a breathtaking pace, completing one fully equipped Thunderbolt every single hour. To understand the complexity of this feat, consider the resources poured into each plane. 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of internal wiring, and nearly 2,000 pounds of strategic aluminum were combined into a combat-ready machine. The Germans could not afford to build a machine so large, nor could they afford to lose one. This manufacturing supremacy was mirrored in personnel. While German pilot training standards, due to fuel and resource scarcity, had plummeted to less than 100 hours of total flight time by the war's end, American pilots arrived in Europe with rigorous training programs, boasting over 400 hours in the cockpit. The P-47, therefore, was not merely a superior plane. It was a superior pilot, backed by an endless stream of replacements, all part of an industrial philosophy that the Axis powers simply could not compete with. The production line had become the most effective weapon in the P-47's formidable arsenal. The ultimate measure of the Thunderbolt's success was not an American report, but the reluctant, final, and total concession of the enemy. The most powerful psychological turn came when the early mocker of the P-47, the German ace Joseph Pips Priller, was forced to deliver his final, unvarnished verdict on the machine. His assessment, given late in the war, was so honest about the Luftwaffe's failure that it was deemed too demoralizing for official publication. Priller declared, "The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now." This statement represents the full transformation of German opinion, using the words of a former critic to deliver the video's powerful final moral. The laughter died when the Jagdflieger realized the P-47 had built-in advantages that transcended dogfighting skill. Its structural design included unique features like double control cables, ensuring that one set could be severed without crippling the aircraft. Furthermore, its electrically heated guns prevented the high-altitude freeze-ups that plagued German armament systems, ensuring the full, devastating 6,000 rounds per minute were ready to fire at any moment. The P-47 was a machine engineered to survive and to kill in overwhelming volume, a terrifying testament to American pragmatism. It was a fighter that could absorb damage from German cannon fire, shake off the blow, and, thanks to its superior altitude and unjammed guns, deliver an inescapable, deadly response. The German High Command, in the end, realized that their focus on elegant, lightweight designs had been their undoing. They had built fighters for a duel. The Americans built the P-47 for annihilation. The P-47 Thunderbolt's legacy is not measured in its speed or its elegant handling, but in the final, staggering statistics of its brutal effectiveness. This one aircraft, initially mocked as a flying milk bottle, ultimately claimed more than 3,752 German aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat. Its greater impact, however, was on the ground war, where its guns and rockets smashed 86,000 railway cars and neutralized over 6,000 German armored vehicles, crippling the Nazi war machine from the French coast to the heart of Germany. The P-47 became the perfect instrument of attrition, a relentless flying extension of the American factory floor. Even General Adolf Galland, the celebrated German fighter general, was forced into a painful final admission that confirmed the video's entire thesis. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943, he conceded. "We tried to build a technically superior German fighter, but they built an American one designed around production, firepower, and survivability." That is the inescapable conclusion. The P-47 was a weapon of industrial logic, designed to be quickly built, easy to fly, and nearly impossible to kill. Its great engine and 8 machine guns were famously referred to as Roosevelt's piano, and by 1945, that haunting sound of the Donnerschlag was the death knell for the German Air Force. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it systematically destroyed it, transitioning from an object of German derision to an instrument of annihilation. The laughter had died with their comrades, and by May 1945, the thunder had spoken.